So, it is time for our very last panel now. We very much regret that Karim Khan, prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, will unfortunately not be able to join us today due to urgent short-term commitments. However, we're certainly not short on topics to discuss. As we've heard time and again today, it has been quite a week. Last Wednesday has been a double shock for transatlantic and European stability, especially for Germany. Just hours after Donald Trump won the US election in a historic comeback, the German governing coalition collapsed. So for now, the government will continue operating as a minority in parliament. We today got to know that there will be elections in February. So those elections, Germans will face with growing instability, a weakened economy, social polarization, and internal anti-democratic threats. Simultaneously, Europeans will, and we have talked about this before as well, to confront the impact of Donald Trump's election and his America First slogan. To put those events into perspective and also to look ahead in light of the recent developments, I am thrilled to welcome two outstanding speakers to our stage who, on quite short notice, have graciously agreed to help us make sense of the past few days. Please welcome with me to the stage Stephen Erlanger, the Chief Diplomatic Correspondent of the New York Times in Berlin, and Stefan Kornelius, who is Head of Politics at Süddeutsche Zeitung in Munich. Thank you.
Here we go. This is the Steve and Stephen show. We don't have a moderator, so we need to entertain ourselves and you and whatever.
Right.
Please bear with us. This is unrehearsed and unheard of. And, since we know each other, we thought this might work.
Might be fun.
Will be fun.
Okay.
So how should we do it?
You begin.
I begin. Okay. So it's me.
You're the host.
I'm the host. So I guess this is whatever, another historic day. We have so many of them. We don't even know how to cover all of this. So the title is very well suited. What's not in the news? We probably missed too many things which are not in the news. But I guess the art right now is to take oneself a little bit back and try to get a more of a bird's eye view on what's happening and understand what's happening. And I was tempted to talk about the parallel lives our both countries do live, since we do have government changes and severely so, and since we do have major probably changes in the electorate and the votership, and we probably haven't got a grasp right now or an idea of what's actually happening to us. Most of us in this hall will be part of the educated, liberal, whatever elite, left-leaning, right-leaning, but sort of we're not questioning the system, but something else is happening out there, more so in the US than in Germany. So let me probably kick it off with 2-3 assumptions which we probably should question, and why I do think that these elections which are coming now might be, and this is now already a given in this town, probably the last one which will be led under the old auspices, like the old assumptions we do have. But nevertheless, it might not be true. So one of the traps the political elite here now, the governing elite and the governing parties and the center and the middle parties might walk into is the maths trap. It looks like this town and this country is assuming Friedrich Merz will become the next chancellor. The figures, all the polls, all the demoscopy we do have points in this direction. It's pretty tough to wonder, to question whether it might not take place, why it should fail. But nevertheless, remember the last time, remember the elections 3 years ago, where we were under similar assumptions, which actually saw Olaf Scholz rising from the fray and slightly being in the lead. The second might be the social democratic trap. will Scholz be able to restage the miracle and do the same stunt as he did last time? Or will he actually walk into these elections? He might be ousted before. So this is very uncharted terrain for the social Democrats as well. And the third thing I want to lay down in front of all of us is the point respice finem, think about the end. And we haven't done that properly, to my assumption. So after the coalition broke a week ago, everybody was relieved, said, well, this is wonderful, it's great, we all needed this, it's a breath of fresh air. But nobody thought about the day after. Not after last week, but the day after the elections. And the day after the elections, we will all wake up and realize that this country has a splintered party system as before. We almost call it the Dutch model or the Netherlands model, because we are like the Netherlands, a fragmented party system, where probably in the end, 4 parties will end up in parliament, and that might be the lucky call, or in the less lucky call, 7 or even 8 parties might end up there. But in sum, about 30% of the electoral vote will go to parties which will not be able to use them for governing. So a third of the electorate will definitely cast their vote for parties which will not be able to run this country, because they wouldn't find majorities, they are too radical, so whatsoever. So respice finem, think about the day after. The day after will leave us with the same coalition situations we are in right now, probably in reversed order, but there's the same issues being unsolved, which is, for example, the Schuldenbremse issue, or the question how we view the war and how much we want to engage in, and you just heard the panel about that. The question about our economic fatigue and how to get out of it, the economic stimulus we need, the question on how to balance spending on social matters and on economic matters. So things will not disappear. We just get a break now, and I take that break.
All right, good. Well, that was very comprehensive, and I'm going to ask you all sorts of questions later.
No, I'll ask you
just about Zara Wagenknecht, who has no sense of humor at all, having talked with her, the AfD, and whether Germany can have 2 parties again, ever. But in my country, I remember when Joe Biden won, which he did rather narrowly, in the key states, he won, I think, by roughly 44,000 votes. Emmanuel Macron was very disappointed. He really looked almost upset, kind of grudging, because his argument had been in the first Trump term that Europe had to get its act together because America had changed. And as often he spoke very eloquently, sometimes he leads and looks around and there's nobody behind him, which has kind of been happening. But then Biden was elected and people thought, ah, well, that's okay. The America we kind of know is back. Trump's the exception. Well, I guess he wasn't. That's really the point. So it seems to me, to some degree, when we're talking about Europe, it's not like Europe has done nothing. That's not true, but it's had some response to 2014. But basically, I think of the last 6 years as pretty wasted. I mean, if the aim is to produce Europe that can stand on its own, that can produce weapons, that can be a significant pillar inside NATO, without even thinking about something as bizarre as a European army, which I think is a bad idea anyway, because I don't know who would order it into battle. I mean, would it be Ursula von der Leyen, really? I mean, what would be the political control? It does seem to me we are now entering a different era. I know that sounds pompous, but we saw it coming, and then we decided not to see it coming, and now it's here. And it is an America that is more self-interested, not isolationist, not at all, maybe more selfish, less tolerant of abetting other people's weakness, much more interested. You heard Ken Weinstein here. I thought he was quite explicit that we're interested in the Indo-Pacific and we'd really like Europe to take care of itself, and we're a little skeptical about it, but please make an effort, make an offer, right? The problem is the things he suggests that Europe do to appease Donald Trump tend to be just the kinds of things that are neuralgic inside Europe that Europe really doesn't want to do. But this is a really important moment. And it is a moment, to say the obvious, where the traditional couple, la couple, France, Germany, which has never been enough for a while to run Europe, but which is impossible in Europe to get anything done without them, are both up in the air. I mean, not gone, but in periods of transition. And faced with real questions of what we see in America also, of a kind of popular revolt amid a significant portion of the population. I wouldn't say a majority, not at all, but a significant proportion against the way things have been, against complacency, against what you described very nicely as coalitions that are kind of lowest common denominator, where the party you vote for doesn't really have a voice or doesn't have a pure voice. And of course, you said a third of the country wouldn't, but of course in America, 48.8% of the country won't feel it has a voice. But I'm not into Armageddon. I mean, even if the Republicans take the House, which I expect marginally, it's going to be a very rocky ride. The Republicans had a hard time managing the House last time. They'll have the Senate. I think Trump will be much more worried about the war at home. You know, who's going to be Attorney General, for instance, what kind of retribution he may try to make on the people who opposed him in the past. I am worried about what the academics call democratic backsliding. Probably the best example of it is Bolsonaro or Orban, or even now Fico, or even in Mexico, where people are elected as reformists because they want to reform the rotten system. And what they mean is, they argue it's a system where all these civil servants are acting without being elected. So we have to put elected officials on top of them and even to replace them, right? So it's all about executive power. It's about intimidating the media. It's about controlling the judiciary as best as possible. Who gets charged, who has to go on trial, who's being investigated. And as you see, sometimes you end up with a system where these traditional examples of oversight in democratic societies suddenly begin to disappear, whether it's the courts or it's the civil service. For example, lots of things happen in America by convention. I mean, for example, this idea of the FBI investigating nominees for high office, separate from Senate confirmation, because that's a whole other thing. That's just a convention. It's not in the law. Donald Trump says he doesn't think that's necessary anymore. And of course, nothing will stop him from getting rid of it if that's what he wants to do, but it's an example of the kind of layer of oversight that has been traditional in American democracy. And one sees it in Europe too. So, I mean, this is part of what interests me about this new moment. It's a challenge to conventional thinking. It's a challenge to complacency. It's also a challenge, and this brings me to Ukraine, to the simple principle that sovereign states should be kept sovereign and integral. That's what we all agree. That's the Westphalian idea of a state. That's what the Helsinki Accords were about. And that is at risk in Ukraine. Now, I don't know what Donald Trump is going to do in Ukraine. I don't know what he wants to do. I'm not sure. It's not going to be another Donald Trump, Kim Jong-un kind of thing where you get talks and a lot of attention and a lot of media anxiety and not much actually happens. That could also be true too. But there is a sense in Trump, he knows the system better now. He's angry. He's angry. The first time he didn't even expect to win and didn't know what he was doing. This time he has people all around him who do know what they're doing, who are much more ideological, and he's out for retribution. I don't think he's going to take it out on Europe necessarily, but you can feel already in what Ken says the transactional nature of the Trump policy, which is a change. It's a new period, and he has more time to kind of refine it than he did last time.
I was extremely opposed to this early election date in Germany. I wrote it. I wrote an opinion piece where I said I think this is the worst time you can take for the reason first, as I said earlier, respice finum, what happens next? You know what happens, so why do it then? And second, and this is what actually you point to, and this is I guess what we should talk about in more depth. It's what I call the Trump lure, the kind of promises he conveys, he offers, which have a huge sort of mirror effect, will have a huge mirror effect here. I think the Trump example for our elections or for European political landscape overall are extremely damaging and dangerous because the underwriting assumption that the system sucks, that the system needs to be gotten rid of, I think is the worst argument you can throw in front of the wolves or the voters. Because if you downplay, if you down-talk the system, if you basically call this a rotten or dysfunctional system, you already give up on it. And we are fortunately far from being that far down the drains as Trump went. He went down this road and basically took away all respect and all acceptance for the existing system in the US. So we are not there yet, but we do see those parties, the populist parties, the AfD mostly, but also Wagenknecht, who both question the legitimacy of our institutions and the systems. And our constitution is built on the give and take. It's built on the compromise. It's built on the democratic idea that parties have to find other parties to form majorities. And if you have a revolutionary approach or sort of if you're signaling you're not willing to compromise because everything is rotten, then you're not really good for that system. And that's my biggest fear for our upcoming political period, that we are slowly sliding in this Trump lure, in this idea that we can question the legitimacy of the system. System fatigue is already here, and we have to admit the coalition itself, the Ampel coalition, did a lot to enhance it. They themselves talked about it all the time. So they were the best critiques, which I think was odd all the time over the past 3 years. And I think the other lesson which we should take or watch more closely from the US, and I'm interested in what you say about the American society, I think there's a huge voter realignment taking place or has taken place, not only in the past 3-4 years, but even longer in the US, but it's starting here as well. We all know that the traditional party affiliation has eroded, but this new alignment is according two lines. One is money. That's always the same. It's the economy is stupid. So it's those who have gained economically in their wealth and their well-being, and those who have not. And inflation, price increases, and so have dynamized this process. And this is clearly visible in the US. And the second cleavage we do see is between those who are more educated and those who are less educated. And this is another threatening cleavage, because our traditional catch-all parties, the Mitteparteien, they basically appeal to both sides of the road, and they probably don't do anymore because they are pushed into this you're the elite issue, and so we, the people, the ordinary people, don't want to have anything to do with you. And this is a very dangerous divide we do see. And you already saw in the three East German countries, in the Bundesländer, where we now had the regional elections, and where, funny enough, the day Donald Trump was voted into office, the Saxonian Wagenknecht party called off their Sondierungsgespräche to basically tell them, we get rid of, we don't do this now. This is not the time for a coalition, since we are running on a general opposition course. We're fundamentally questioning the legitimacy of the system. And so I guess our election will be along the same dividing lines. One is economy, and the other one is migration. Yeah. This is what worked with Trump. Migration is the dividing factor, and all of us who deal with migration or know the nitty-gritties behind the argument exactly do know the law and do know the leverage room we do have. There's not much wiggle room, so you automatically get between a rock and a hard place and you're squashed. Yeah. Because Trump does promise major changes in the system, and he might actually be able to deliver it in some respect.
I just hope you don't have the same quality of culture wars that we do, because so much of the cleavage in America hasn't really been about you know, money so much as it's been about how people stand on these cultural issues. And if you include abortion, which is to me not really a cultural issue, but never mind. And what's interesting to me about what we already know, I mean, we're still figuring it out, not all the votes even have been counted, but in the three battleground states, so-called, that Kamala Harris had to win, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, she lost by only a total of 250,000 votes when you add all three states. They were very, very, very close. So obviously we have a big election and it's a big country, and it looks like Donald Trump won the popular vote. First time the Republicans have done that in a really, really long time. But at least it doesn't contradict the Electoral College this time. But what you see already is Democrats who came out to vote for Joe Biden did not come out to vote for Kamala Harris. And one has to ask oneself why. I mean, was it because she was a woman? Was it because she was mixed race? Was it because she was a weak candidate? Was it because she had a bad campaign? Was it because we need to dig into these things, and Democratic analysts will. But the other thing that strikes me very hard is Trump also expanded his base. He seemed to run a campaign on his base, which was basically, I mean, kind of boyish, toxic masculinity, appealing mostly to white male Christians who didn't go to college. That was the source of his base. But he also got more Republican women to vote for him this time than did in 2016 or did in 2020 in the midterms. And he got more Latinos. And why? Partly because they're making money. Trump promises lower taxes, right? And partly because I think the Democratic Party, and again, I'm not there, but I've been watching American elections for an awfully long time, didn't appeal to its you'd think its natural base, which is working class Americans and black Americans. They didn't come out in the way the Democrats needed them to. And you saw that in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, but you saw it even in New York. So there is a question of whether somehow, even in this two-party system that we have, the Democrats have narrowed their interests too much and need to rethink again how to appeal to the kinds of voters who were attracted by Trump's simplicity, maybe even by his vulgarity, but certainly by his image of strength. You know, we're not going to take it anymore. America über alles, etc.
This seems to be a huge issue. I mean, strength, showing leadership. I wonder, how do you see the German side on this? Because I mean, I was struck by what Joachim Gauck wrote in his last book very eloquently about exactly those temptations of populists and of strongmen. And he quoted those surveys which basically said more than 50, almost 60% of the American population has an authoritarian predisposition. That's a huge number, and he came up with the same, a lesser number for Germany, almost 40. But this basically says, okay, you have to at least convey the image of leadership, convey the image of control.
And also of that you're defending your nation. I know, you know, the whole point of the European Union, I'm a big fan of the European Union as a degree of shared sovereignty, we're all in this together, et cetera, et cetera. But part of what you see in France, and you see it among the extreme parties in Italy, everywhere else, is just a sense of our identity is dissolving and we want to restore it. I mean, I think people underestimate the power of nationalism and national identity. And I'm not saying it's a great thing. You know, I used to joke that in America we're patriots and the rest of the world are nationalists, right? But there is something to this, and this is the migration question. This is the fear of dissolution of even a fantasy of how life used to be in America. You know, in the 50s, someone who worked in a car factory could afford 2 cars, could send his kids to college, his wife didn't have to work. That's gone a long, long time ago. And even if most of the reason is due to automation that a lot of these jobs are gone, it's very easy to blame globalization. I mean, there's a big argument there. And then with migration, even I went, because I wanted to go cover the elections in Saxony and Thuringia. And I had long talks with lots of kind of nicely dressed, well-presented, articulate people who either expressed the kind of Putin-y line that Ukraine is really a US-Russia proxy war that risks dragging Germany again into a conflict that, you know, it's the same argument on these missiles when people forget that Kaliningrad is so close and you could all be blown up in 5 minutes from now without these American missiles anyway. But I had a long talk with Katja Wolf, who was the lead candidate for the BSW in Thuringia, and she was the mayor of a little town called Eisenach. And when she described what migration did to her town, she was very rational, very factual. It's about 40,000 people, and the number of immigrants went up from like 2% to 15% of the population. And she said, we tried to welcome them, but we ran out of apartments, and there weren't enough doctors, and not enough school places. And then you have all the Ukrainians who are spending half their time in Ukraine, and they're moving back and forth, and they're getting money, and Germans feel that they're not getting money, and that in Berlin, Berlin wants to save the world, and it's forgotten about Germans. I mean, that's the kind of thing that one hears. And this works. So, you know, I think traditional center-right, center-left parties have to figure out how to speak to these concerns, because populists are voters. They're democratic citizens. They have the right to vote, and people need to listen to what bothers them.
It will be, for me, it will be one of the most fascinating features of the upcoming campaign, the evolving debate on security. Germany was, since I do remember security debates, mostly spared these things. But now this is the first elections after the war has started, sort of, or most people at least realize it has started. It has started far earlier, we all know, but now it is there. So it's the first campaign. And the interesting thing is the populists who also play two sides of that fiddle. The other one is anti-Americanism.
Sure, absolutely.
Now do have Donald Trump in the White House, who they quietly admire and think he's a great guy. They would like to be like him. So they're in a sort of a mind pretzel, somebody called it.
I like that.
And they have to figure out, well, how they argue that case. But yeah, you're right. The notion of security, of safety, of being homely, of being identity-driven will be strong, will be extremely big. And I mean, as I said, I guess we're lurching behind at least 4 or 5 years. We don't have the intensity of the argument as we saw it now in the presidential campaign. But it is slowly coming up, and it'll change.
And then I was just going to say, I mean, the other thing just one should talk about is simply Russia. I mean, we've had panels here talking about Russia. I think Europe in general, I don't mean to collectivize, but Europe in general has a sense that there's danger out there, but I don't think they realize its dimensions or how long it's going to last. And I don't think they feel I don't think they see it enough. I mean, they sort of see it, but not sufficiently. I mean, I always felt and that Obama, frankly, he didn't take it seriously enough in 2014. He thought Merkel could handle it, that it was a European problem. Frankly, I think he thought it was unsolvable, probably. But I would have liked the US to be part of the Minsk arrangements, to be part of the Normandy discussions. And it was Trump, after all, who brought the American tank brigade back to Europe that Obama had taken out, and who at least allowed the Ukrainians to have anti-tank weapons, which proved very useful indeed in February 2022. So I don't make lots of assumptions, but I do think, as the general who was just here said, and as Rob Bauer, who's the chairman of the NATO Military Committee, has said, the next 3 to 5 years are very serious. And Rob Bauer says similarly that Europe should turn some of its civilian industrial production over to the military. I can't see that happening, to be honest, but I don't know how one expresses the threat more. I think from Trump's point of view, Ukraine isn't a primary American national security problem. China is. He thinks Ukraine is Europe's problem if Europe wants it to be a problem. So I do worry about this. And I'm hoping Europe will come together and make some proposals to Trump. Not in a pathetic way, because Trump hates being sucked up to. I mean, he has contempt for people who try to suck up to him. One has to deal with him from strength to say, look, this is what we're willing to do. We recognize there's a problem, blah, 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 but I'm not optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I think the threat issue poses a double risk in the German campaign. It will go down extremely well with a huge audience, I guess. There's a sensitivity growing over the past 2-3 years, which I think is new in this country. It hasn't been there before, so you can address the issue and you get a lot of positive response or affirmative response, but then there is just the opposite. Those who say you're warmongers and you're pulling us into something and we should be isolationists. Yeah. I guess your questions, I read them. How could Germany's collapsed coalition influence Europe's unity, particularly in addressing challenges like economic instability and security threats? No, you're the Brussels correspondent. I asked myself the next question, but you're the Brussels guy.
My impression has been, certainly being in Brussels a long time and talking to people there, that this chancellor was not very interested in Europe. He didn't particularly want to lead in Europe. He made no real effort to do that. He and Macron never got on, but often there's a long history of French and German leaders not getting on. But this was really quite visible. You could see it. I mean, they really don't like each other.
I was told Scholz never asked Macron a question.
Yeah, well, you don't need to ask Macron a question, you just need to listen. No, so, I mean, so people were looking for German help in Brussels, and then often because of the awkward coalition and the FDP and the money issue, there was a feeling that actually this coalition government was in the way of some important European issues, that it was blocking progress on some of them. So I think if we end up with, again, I'm not going to predict, but a CDU-led something, I think Merz, if he wins, if he runs the place, if he works out a coalition agreement that he can live with. I mean, if he has to do it with the SPD, it's not going to be easy, right? I think Europe at least would see a new chance to bring Germany in a serious way, and even to think about collective defense bonds the way there were collective bonds for COVID. I think that would make a tremendous difference for Europe if, as the Luxembourg minister said, the money was spent intelligently and done in coordination with NATO and not in opposition with NATO. I don't want the EU setting standards for guns to be made, right? I just think NATO's the military alliance. The EU has a lot to do with mobility and lots of other things, but money and industrial production matter quite a lot. So I think people would look forward at least to a change, to a German government that isn't paralyzed.
No. I mean, you're right. I barely remember a German government being so little interested in European matters than this one. And as Germany, you pretty much have to follow the famous Joschka Fischer sentence that leading from behind or lead without being caught leading. And this is totally missing. Very many European nations want to be not led, but they want to feel there's somebody taking responsibility, yes, and they're happy to follow if suggestions are reasonable, and this is not happening. So I guess there will be an opportunity in a new government. And the next question was on Merz. Will there be a positive shift in transatlantic relations with Friedrich Merz as a chancellor? I mean, I wonder, a positive shift. We actually do have pretty good transatlantic relations up to now. The Scholz-Biden arrangement was made in heaven. They just liked each other for various reasons. Mostly because Biden allowed Scholz to hide behind his back and to follow suit like a step behind, but he followed, he did. Yeah. I remember the tank decision on Ukraine, which was a nice dance, honestly, and
annoyed Biden no end.
Yeah, he was annoyed, and but nevertheless, Scholz needed Biden to cover for his Ukraine decisions and not losing parts of his party and definitely not parts of society. And this kind of tit-for-tat went actually quite well. So Merz, will he be a good transatlantic advocate? Yes, I mean, he's being growing up since he was born, being a transatlanticist, basically. So he should be able to do it. He used to run the Atlantic Brigade, didn't he? So.
I know. I mean, I remember meeting him 20 years ago or something. Right? I mean, no, because I worry a little bit about Trump and Germany anyway, just because Trump has this obsession in his head about Germany. I don't know whether it's because of his grandfather, what happened to his grandfather, who was Herr Trumpf, or no, Trumpf, no, or whether it was his relationship with Merkel. I mean, I once managed to get into the New York Times, though they'd never do it today, that Angela Merkel was not his kind of girl. But it was a very difficult relationship. So there's something, and then even when I interviewed Trump quite by accident in 1988, before he became even a politician, he even then was obsessed with Germany living off the American taxpayer and the Americans protecting Germany, which was allowing it to have this wonderful social welfare system. Of course, it was a bit unfair because at that point, in 1988, Germany was still spending quite a lot of money on defense, at least the FRG was. So I do worry a bit just about that relationship. I doubt Rick Grinnell's going to be back, but he's
until now, he's not.
No, he's not.
And the two big jobs he was talked about seem to be gone.
Yeah. My guess is he'll get something important, but
ambassador to Germany. He's coming back.
No, precisely. So it'll be interesting to see, but I mean, again, I'm always, my worry is, a friend of mine said, his worry is that Europe won't get its act together to deal with Trump in a more serious way, but everyone will, as they did in the first term, compete for Trump's attention bilaterally, or as this person said, there'll be a race to climb up Trump's trouser legs.
I have a positive hope or something. I'm not sure whether I should say that publicly, but are we public here?
Be positive.
Be positive. No, I wonder, we all know that this is a foreseeable term, which will basically be over in 2 years' time. And his new chief of staff already announced in Las Vegas the other day that Trump is aware that he cannot come back. So it might actually not be necessary to play him or to appeal to his instincts. First of all, I guess he's handled much better, or will be handled much better than in the first term. And we already see now in the pace and the choice of his personnel that there seems to be a little bit more of systemic behind it, some idea behind it. So probably he is being handled quite wisely and can be approached on a more rational basis. And my second hope is that since he knows that this is a limited term, he's already on the legacy thing. He wants to leave something behind. And that might be the Trump movement, the MAGA movement, whatever, whether it holds or not, it's not up to him, but he probably thinks now he's rectified. He's back in office. He's okay. Now he wants to be flattered. He wants to be the king. And
the other thing I think he very much wants, he wants to take credit for ending the wars that occurred in the Biden administration, Ukraine and Gaza. I think Bibi's been waiting for Trump. Trump, I think, is quite serious about coming. I don't know how he's going to do it, and I don't know the shape of it, but I think he wants to end the bloodshed in both places and take credit for it, because, you know, it'll be the best of all possible diplomatic arrangements ever, because Trump did it, and that's what he wants. So, you know, as I say, I don't believe in Armageddon. I think there are things Trump cares about. There are things he's been unpredictable about, but his vanity makes him a little bit manipulable, I would say.
Let's prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and also call it a day.
Call it a day, and thank you all for your patience. Good. Voila.